I'd like to hear the answer that you've got to this question. So imagine, you're at a bar, coffee shop, whatever, and somebody asks you who you are. What would you tell them? What would you say the answer to that is?
Uh, I'm a dad of two amazing kids and a husband to an amazing wife. I'm somebody who cares a lot about making the world more whole and more loving and more honest.
Mm,
And I do that through a lot of different things. Uh, so I don't define myself by my work. I know often people ask, "Who are you?" and you tell them what your job is.
yeah.
And I work I work very hard not to answer the question about who I am with my work. Um, so that's what I say.
I like it, man. I like it. Why don't we get into honesty a little bit? Because I feel like it's an underrated asset, to say the least, in our society and a lot of societies. So, tell me the importance of being honest. I'm curious to hear your viewpoint.
Well, I spent 15 years studying 3,200 leaders for that book to understand, could we predict the conditions under which somebody will tell the truth and behave fairly and serve a greater purpose? And could we predict the conditions under which they might lie or cheat and be self-interested? I think we're all tired. Like, we don't need to hear one more Volkswagen story or one more Theranos story or one more college admissions scandal story, or pick the headline of the day. We look around ourselves and we're desperate for somebody to set an example of a leader we want to follow, of a company we're proud to work for. And I think we're just a little tired of the employee engagement stats that say 70% of us are checked out, that we all report to assholes for bosses. When somebody has to write a book called The No Asshole Rule as a book on leadership, you know that we've really hit the bottom. And I wanted to know, I'm tired of my clients who are very senior executives running very big companies asking me questions that they should already know the answers to. So I wanted to go find out, are there people out there living and leading in ways that we're not understanding? And so the research the goal wasn't for it to be a book. It was just to sort of understand, could we predict the conditions? Are there things in our companies hiding in plain sight, um, luring people to the dark side, turning honest people into dishonest people? And if there were, could we prevent them? So that's what the research set out to prove. It did. We did find four very prominent conditions that will direct your behavior one way or the other.
Mm,
Published the research, and that was it. But then people would come and ask, people would read the research and they'd resonate, wow, my company's all these things, or I see this every day. Could you screen the Wells Fargo story through your findings? Or could you screen the college admissions scandal through your findings, which is about as inspiring as root canal? And I'm like, oh, and so I did a couple, and I'm like, I don't want it. This is depressing. And then I got scared. I'm like, wait, could we have proven four things that nobody's doing? Like, is there nobody out there that actually is embodying these principles? Because that would suck. So out of anxiety, I went and started looking to see, could we find leaders and organizations that truly were embodying the things we found in the research to the good side. And what a joy it was to find them coming out of the woodwork. Like, they're everywhere. The world is teeming with leaders and companies who are the heroes of honesty. And honesty is defined as truth, justice, and purpose, meaning that to be labeled honest, you have to say the right thing, do the right thing, and say and do the right thing for the right reason. Not just one of them, but all three. And so then we thought, okay, writing a book of heroes would be a fun book to write. We don't need to write about the villains anymore. We know all about them, and we get them in headlines every day. So when we found so many inspiring leaders and organizations out there truly setting an example that we'd all be proud to emanate, and for me, it was, are these people that I'd want to work for, that I would want to hire to be my boss? And that's what led to the book, was saying, I want to put these stories on display for the world to say, they've lit the path, well, follow.
Hmm. It's interesting, man. You're right. We do hear about the villains a lot, and it's because we're attracted to the negative by nature. A big part of us, anyways. And the media likes to tap into that.
Well, a lot more clickbait. They
Yeah,
certainly get
damn
more
right.
clicks.
Damn right. And I get it. We're hearing about that all the time. I want to get into the four conditions a little bit that somebody would be dishonest, and we can switch to the honest side of things. So, what are the four conditions that you found, and then we can make that pivot.
Well, so and they work. The good news is the statistical models work both ways, right? So the condition is neutral. How you embody it decide. So, for example,
Interesting.
being who you say you are. So all of our organizations have words they use to describe them, their missions, their values, their brand promises. We all, as leaders and as humans, have value sets we live by. We may not advertise them, but we tell people what they are by how we behave. Turns out that if there's a say-do ratio of 1 to 1, that your actions and words really do line up to what the story says, you're 3 times more likely to have people be honest. But if there's a say-do gap, if the words are only words on the wall, but not really how things actually work around here, you've now institutionalized duplicity. You told your organizations
Mm.
around here we say one thing but we do another, and in that case, you're now 3 times more likely to have people be dishonest because you told them it's okay. Accountability, the way in which our work is talked about, measured, rewarded, uh, developed. If I believe that as my leader, I'm not just a cog in your wheel, but my work matters to you, that I have as much of a chance of being successful here as anybody else, no matter what I look like or who I show up as, and I don't think the system is rigged. If that's the case and my work is treated with dignity, even when I fall short, you're 4 times more likely to have me be honest. But if I'm a cog in your wheel, if I'm nothing more than a number in a box, if I'm just a means to your end, and the way you talk about my work is demeaning and demoralizing, now you're 4 times more likely to have me be dishonest because now I have to cover my mistakes and embellish my accomplishments. You never hear people say, I'm so excited. It's my performance review today. Why is it that the process that should be the most honoring and dignifying process has become the most demeaning and demoralizing moment in a year? It makes no sense, but it is. Decision making and transparency. So if I walk into a room with people sitting around a table, often referred to as a meeting, and what's happening around that table is an honest exchange of ideas. The person at the whiteboard doesn't have an agenda that they're trying to guide me toward, but is really looking to facilitate a decision or a problem solving conversation or an idea generation session. And I feel like if I were to offer a point of view that's different than the one in the room, I'd be welcome to do that. That's what transparency looks like. Now you're 3.5 times more likely to have me be honest. But if I walk into that room and it's nothing but orchestrated theater, where the decision was made yesterday, and now this is the place where you make it look like I'm part of it, where there's clearly someone at the whiteboard with an agenda guiding me toward it, and the last thing you want to hear from me is a point of view that differs from the room's growing point of view. Now you're 3.5 times more likely to have me lie because you told me that the truth is not in this room. I have to go underground to find it.
Hmm.
And the last one, which was probably the most surprising, was cross-functional rivalries. So at the seams of your organization, where work comes together to create competitive performance, sales and marketing, supply chain and operations, R&D and consumer analytics, the places where we differentiate ourselves. If at those seams, there's a healthy amount of well-managed conflict, if we're not doing scarecrow arms, if it's we and not me and they, now I've got a single source of truth and we're all part of a bigger story. Now you are 6 times more likely to have people be honest. But if there are silos and border wars, if there is trench warfare, and everybody that works outside my tribe is a they, now you fragment the organization, and when you do that, you fragment the truth. And so now my goal is to not find a single source of truth. My goal is to help you understand that my truth is right and yours is wrong. and I'm going to gather evidence to prove that and vilify you. Now you're 6 times more likely to have people be dishonest because all I care about is my truth, not our truth. The really powerful thing about the model, Kyle, is that the statistics are cumulative. So if you are good at all 4 of those things, you are 16 times more likely to have people create an honest environment. They will tell the truth, they will behave fairly, and they will serve a greater good. But if you suck at all 4 of those things, you are now 16 times more likely to put yourself in a New York Times headline story that you never wanted to be in.
Hmm. How do you come up with the numbers that you're multiplying them by? It's interesting. You say 3.5 times, 4 times, 6 times.
So
How do you
that's
do
the
those?
research. So the research, we used SSPI modeling. So we use statistical modeling in the qualitative data. We use really cool AI technologies to read all the transcripts of the interviews
Oh,
and
I love that.
and model them. And so those statistical models work both ways. The great news is that you don't have to, it's not all or nothing, right? So we play with the models and have to say, okay, well, do you have to be perfect? And the interesting thing was if you were to improve, for example, the first one, the say-do ratio, if you improve alignment between your actions and words by even 40%, you get a 20% hit in honesty or an 18% hit in honesty, right? So think of them as like bass and treble equalizers, right? You can move them and you can make incremental improvements in them. You don't have to go to be perfect at all of them. And even that much improvement in an organization of 30,000 people is a remarkable difference in behavior and outcomes.
And they compound on top of each other, right? I mean, it's not
They
just
do.
like the 30 adds on to the 30 and then the next, so it's like it really compounds to the 16 times like you're talking
Yep.
about, which is
They are
fascinating
very
too.
interrelated. They are very interrelated dimensions.
Have you considered the internal implications of this? Saying you're going to do something and actually doing it yourself, applying these to yourself internally?
So funny you asked that question, Kyle, because of all the nerves that the data has hit whenever I present it, the one that hits the strongest nerve is in that first finding when I ask leaders to say, I want you to look over your calendars for the last 2 weeks, and I want you to pick out 8 or 10 moments where you would say privately in your own heart that your actions and words didn't match, that you didn't act in accordance with the values you would proclaim. Maybe you were snide to a barista, maybe you embellished data to your boss, or you withheld feedback from a direct report because you didn't want to deal with them being defensive, or you shoot your kids away impatiently because you had a deadline, whatever it is. What I promise you is that if you do that analysis honestly, you will see a pattern. You will recognize that the things that bring you to your dishonesty are choices you're making for a reason. They serve a purpose. And because none of our choices are random, they're all adaptations of who we are. And if you want to be a more honest person, you have to start by being honest about the places that bring you to your dishonesty. And
Mm,
so
mm.
what that has opened up is a lot of questions. I get emails and texts and calls from leaders going, oh my gosh, I see it. And so we now started a whole new body of research on that called origin stories. So I asked leaders, how many times have you said the words, why did I do that? Or why do I keep doing that?
Mm.
And I follow with, because if you stay long enough to answer the question, there's a reason. None of our choices that behaviors that we wish we had, that we regret, are random. And unless you understand the origin story that trained you in that behavior, you
Mm.
can't change it. And so a colleague and I of mine are beginning a whole bunch of really in-depth research around how do we understand the origin stories of the choices we make if we actually want to change the behavior.
That's so cool, man. It's fascinating because there's a direct correlation between the individual relationships that we have with ourselves, which is also a community, if you will, of
Yes.
different beliefs and complexes within. And then there's the expanding outward of that relationship with other people's internal communities to form
Yep.
the macro community externally within an organization.
That's super insightful, Kyle. Super insightful. And it's not random. Somebody who's really indecisive because they learned as a child to be fearful of
Yeah.
choices
Yeah.
is going to choose an environment and a workplace that's indecisive
Right. It's familiar.
because it just reenacts the narrative that I know. The minute somebody starts being decisive in that environment, I'm going to be threatened.
Hmm.
So you can call me as an executive coach and say, "Hey, I've been told I'm indecisive. Can you help me be more decisive?" I'm like, "Sure." And in that environment, it'll get you fired. or the environment will so greatly discourage you from being decisive because it's built for obscurity. It's built for indecision, that you will drive other people crazy. And so you cannot change the individual's behavior if you don't make sure the system is aligned to support that behavior. We do it all the time to people. We send them off to executive coaches to be fixed, only to come back to environments that discourage the very
Mm.
behavior we ask them to go learn.
So how do we fix that, man? Like, we can look at it at the external organization level and just realizing as we go along that everything applies internally as well. But, which is a fascinating point, right? But how do we fix it? There's a complicated problem you're touching on here, and you can make temporary fixes, make adjustments and beliefs to direct actions. But then if you go back to the same environment that rewards what was punished or is on the surface punished, but deeper down is implicitly rewarded. What's the cure for this?
Well, it's
How
a
do
great
you see
question,
it?
Kyle. When I answer it, I'll let you know. But my hunch is that my hope in this research we're doing now is we have to first name it, right? I think the fact that our understanding of trauma is mainstreaming into organizations, and we understand how our bodies imprint emotions, we imprint experiences, and we're all just adaptations and reenactments of things we learned formatively. The fact that that's now mainstreaming into our language, I think an understanding of it isn't mainstreaming, just the languages. And so we have to catch up with what we now say, with honest information about how it is we really change behavior. I think
Hmm.
the executive coaching world is going to be slow. The therapy world, the talk therapy world, has been a failure because it's just not cognitive, right? We often think about our psyche as the place where we store unwanted behavior, but it's also in our bodies. And so if we don't understand that in our nervous system are the imprints of fear and anger and rage and all the things that make us behave weirdly, that make us go, why did I do that? You can only cognize the problem so much before you're back there anyway. So I think if as our knowledge base catches up with our choices, and those who are in the helping professions designed to help, that'll make it better. But I think it starts by just being honest about the fact that what you say about our individual behaviors and our system behaviors are closely correlated. Just naming that as true would be a great start.
Hmm. What do you think about being honest with all parts of ourselves rather than, because what you're talking about is unconsciously we understand a lot of this. Collectively, we understand all of it. Personal unconscious, we understand a point of it, and then consciously, it's very limited. And that's what you're trying to do is kind of get the roots,
Dig.
right?
Yep.
Exactly, right. So then bring it up so that consciously we can understand, and then be able to make adjustments by revealing and examining the limiting beliefs or the experiences that created this pattern in our lives that might be disadvantageous when it comes to the workplace, for example. So how do you?
Not to mention our marriages and families.
Well, yeah, right, exactly, and the marriage and families we've got with ourselves and with the organizations that we deal with on a day-to-day basis in business. And so, you're touching on something fascinating there. You've got to. I would like to hear how you think about it. Because you're looking at the data of 1,500 company, 1,500, right?
Well, 3,200 leaders.
3,200. Yes, yeah, it's crazy. And then you're using AI to analyze the transcriptions, which is so cool because once you can analyze the language that they're using, it kind of gives you a little
Right.
bit of a peek into their psyche. And I
Yep.
think of the psyche as, no mind body split. It's all one. And then more than internal because there's a connection with the cosmos. So, you know, it becomes interesting when you start to take what a therapist would have learned in let's say like Freudian or Jung, for example. You could take that and take it to the new context, which is where it's practically applied in business on a day-to-day basis, and help the layman who might consider himself an accountant or working in PR or whatever. You can take the psychological underpinnings and the understandings to these individuals to have them practically played out in the real world. And I think that's kind of what you're touching on, right?
Mhm. Let me give you an example. So, client, his name is Andy. We'll call him Andy. CEO of a company he founded years earlier, and the company's doing well. I was the third executive coach that he'd worked with. He was having some issues with people on his team. But to meet him, you think, what a great guy. He's affable and smart and an idea a minute and super articulate and compelling, um, and couldn't be quiet. And when I'd interview people that work with him, they would say he's inspiring and gets up in front of a room. He can move the room to tears and we just love him, but he's never going to change. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, because it's Andy. He's not going to change. And I said, what is it you wish he could change? He goes, he can't be wrong. He will talk to you and persuade you till you give in. When he has an idea, when he wants something a certain way, that's how it's going to go. And we now all know not to bother trying to change his mind.
Hmm.
I'm like, well, that must be exhausting. And they were like, well, you just get used to it. I said, has it ever caused a problem? Like, well, he was just wrong. And they're like, that happens all the time. We know how to clean it up now. And I'm like, wow. So I thought I need to get Andy out of this environment because this is too familiar for him and he has a lot of control mechanisms here that he can reach for. So I invited him out to where I lived in the Pacific Northwest at the time for a 4-day intensive to sort of think a little bit more deeply about the. He knew it was a problem. He knew he did it. It had already cost him one marriage, and it was very well on the way to costing him a second one. And it wasn't like he hadn't tried to change his behavior, but he just couldn't help himself. And so on the second day of our time together at this, we were at some retreat center. I said, Andy, somewhere in your life, you learned that you are safe when you're talking and that you're safer when you're persuading.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying the podcast, and I want to let you know that I've got a free book that you can get if you want to tap into more of these resources, and you can get that for free at kylesbook.com. Back to the podcast.
Where could you have learned that? And I thought he was going to need time to think about it, whatever. But I knew he knew where we were headed. And it didn't take him long at all. He put his head down, he looked up, in about 3 seconds, I could see water pooling in his eyes. He said, third grade. I said, wow, tell me about third grade. He said, I was diagnosed very early on in life with ADHD and dyslexia. And in my first and second grade classes, I would have to stay after school to go to extra special education for training to help cope with those learning disabilities, because most of those classes at the time had no ability to teach me. But I changed schools in third grade. And in third grade, in the new school, those classes were at noon. When everybody else went to recess, I had to take the public walk of shame past all of my mocking, jeering, sniding students down to what everybody would loudly refer to as the stupid classroom every day for the next 3.5 years. I said, and you could tell he was really emotional now. I said, wow, that must have been horrible. I'm guessing that on the way down to that classroom, you must have made yourself a promise. Do you remember what you would have vowed or promised yourself? And he went to speak and he actually couldn't speak, which I thought was incredibly ironic. He wrote on a piece of paper and he passed it across the table to me. And the piece of paper said, I'll never let them see that I'm stupid. And I said, I'm fascinated that what you didn't write was, I'm going to prove that I'm smart. You had already concluded that you were stupid and that your job was to hide it. And now you spent the rest of your life perfecting the ability to keep what you believe to be true secret. But Andy, I talked to 20 people in your company and outside your company who know you. They said all kinds of things about you. Not one person remotely ever questioned your intelligence. They know you're brilliant. You don't know you're brilliant, clearly. And the very rejection you believed you were avoiding by this proving that you're not stupid has ended you up in that very rejection that you thought you were avoiding. So I want you to think about if you could go back down that hallway and make yourself a different promise. What would you want the promise to be now? And I sent him off for a walk in the woods to just calm his nervous system down that was clearly now alarmed. And to think about what he would want to be different. And he clearly never connected these dots before. These were new connections he was making for what was driving the behavior. And every time he would be talking persuasively, he was just reenacting that hallway. He came back and he went to the whiteboard in the room we were in. He wrote on the whiteboard, "I am smart and I am safe when I'm silent." And I thought, well, okay, let's go about making that true. And he's now done a lot of work. He's not by no means perfect yet, but he now understands that when he's provoked to persuade or to keep talking or to not listen to others, that it's a safety reaction. His nervous system believes he's keeping him safe from being exposed as stupid, and that protection mechanism no longer serves a need anymore. It's not protecting him from anything. It's actually hurting him. And now he can make different choices in those moments, most of the
Wow.
time.
Mm.
So there's an example of how you connect the dots and help people understand the origin stories that are the engine behind choices they wish they could change.
Walk me through that I mean, fascinating. Seriously, I was captivated when you were talking about that. To me about the process that you take people through to make those steps back. Because not everybody is going to say, "Oh, third grade, bam." It's a lot of the
So
time it's not
it's
so obvious, especially
it's
if you haven't
not.
thought about it
Well,
intensively
you
like
know
you
what's
clearly
interesting,
have.
Kyle? No one's ever struggled with thinking about a story. And usually your body is holding it, right? So your body's going to bring it to mind right away. Most people
Mm,
struggle with is which story. And so what I ask people to do is go actually write out the story to bring it through a cognitive process. And I ask for in as many excruciating details as you can. I want you to remember the grape jelly stain on your shirt. I want you to remember the musty smell of the bathroom. I want you to remember the clock on the wall. I want you to remember everything that your brain is willing to let you believe is safe to remember, because your brain is clearly trying to hide many details from you, and write it out in detail. And as you do, your body's you're gonna feel it, your stomach's gonna contract, your neck's gonna get tight, you're gonna sweat in your arms. Your body will tell you where it's storing the
mm,
memories it's trying to keep from you, and just relax and just let it happen. And don't force it, but get the story out. And what happens is when you and then I'll say if there's more than one story coming to mind, write them all. Um, I still made Andy go write the story out of that third grade, that hallway, and remembering moments where the little girl, Kathy and Angela, and what their faces were like, and the pieces of paper people threw at him, and because I wanted him to come out of his nervous system. I wanted it to come out of his body. He just had to do it afterwards because it was coming so quickly. But most people, when you put them into the moment to remember the story, they have no problem picking out the moments.
mm.
It's just they don't understand quite what the narrative was. What did I learn? I tell them stories of my own, of things I learned in formative and painful and traumatic moments of my childhood. That it wasn't until decades later that I understood why I behaved in certain ways. And so I think when people realize, oh, these behaviors have long tails, and your job is to be compassionate to yourself and curious. And the times you've said to yourself, "I'm so stupid, I keep doing that," you're just reinforcing it. You're just cementing the behavior as normalized. And so you have to learn to be compassionate and curious to go, how did I learn that? And allow yourself to wander back. And then together we'll look at the stories and look for the patterns and recognize that, like in Andy's case, like in so many cases, there are narratives that were imprinted on you that you helped imprint, that you believed at the time. When he said, "I'll never let anybody see that I'm stupid," he couldn't even speak it. He wrote it to me. But that was a vow. His body was saying, to keep you safe, you must keep this promise. Because look at the world has just turned on you here. Every day you have to face this war. And in order for you to be safe, this is how you have to think. 3.5 years of that's a coat of armor. And it wasn't gonna give itself up just because I went digging. And I think that was hard for him to. Most people think that these moments of discovery and the emotional catharsis that follows them is the healing, and it's not. It's the discovery of the need for healing. and most people want it to be quick and easy. People look at talk to anybody in recovery from any kind of addictive experience, right? They want it to be quick because when they realize the origin story of what got them there in the first place, they think, well, now that I know that, surely that must mean, but it doesn't, because our bodies are not going to give up those protective mechanisms just because you identify them. And
Mm.
so it takes time, it takes work. And hopefully the presence of a loving, caring thought partner of some kind to accompany you on the journey.
It's so interesting, man, because you even just becoming aware of it, something that's been a coat of armor unconsciously, something you haven't dared to look in that dark corner for 3.5 decades or whatever, it becomes almost the image that comes to mind is like the enamel on teeth, the layers up, and then by the
Yep.
time soon enough you can't even see the tooth behind it. And so it's like these layers of armor coat over many years. And then even just getting a viewpoint to the original tooth, to the problem that caused it, to the original, the center of it, the nucleus. Just by getting a view of it, you even just understanding that that's the problem, that
Yep.
that's causing the issues that you're facing in your day-to-day life. Then that can then your unconscious starts to realize that, okay, so if I were to make these minor adjustments, that would help alleviate these problems that I'm facing in real life. And going full circle with honesty, this is what's so cool about it. Once you see the original thing, then you can say, okay, was that true? I made this happened. I made this conclusion of it. Was that a true conclusion? And
Right.
you can always look at it a different way. You can
Right.
reframe the belief that you created based on that initial third grade experience and say, well, wait a minute, is that true? Is there another way to look at this? Is it opposite? And so maybe you can reframe that, and then that's how that work can start to take place. Is that how you describe the process?
Well, I mean, often I'll ask people when I'm doing workshops, I'll say, "How have you been lying to yourself? What's
Mm,
the lie? What's the lie you've told yourself that you never interrogated?"
mm, mm.
And
Many,
people
oh,
know
many.
people know the answer. They know the answer. I think what's really fascinating, Kyle, is I think, yeah, a colleague of mine, she wrote a book called "Design the Life You Love," and so we've done these workshops together called "Design the Honest Life You Love," where we take her design thinking. Her point of view is that your life is your most important project. Design it well. Her name is Aisha Bursell. It's a wonderful book, and she and I have been doing these workshops together, and we've been shocked, like literally shocked. We get people from all over the world on Zoom screens, the things they are ready to divulge. I think people are so hungry to
Mm,
interrogate those falsehoods, those lies, as you call, and wonder maybe there's another way. I think nobody's inviting them to the conversation, and I think they're just desperate to be invited to look in a safe place, in a safe environment. I think they're eager. I think they're so tired of forehead slapping, so tired of the consequences and the losses some of their choices have cost them, that when you simply invite them to say, this is not about you being defective. This is about you keeping yourself safe in perhaps ways you no longer need to do.
mm,
And suddenly when you let go of the defective, I'm broken, I'm no good, I'm inadequate, I'm no good narratives and it can be a little bit more kind and compassionate and empathic to themselves to say, maybe this wasn't about you at all. Maybe this was something that you were taught or that was imposed on you. Suddenly, it's now safer to rethink it. There's something wrong with me is a much safer narrative when you're 3 years old than there's something wrong with my parents or my neighbor or my sibling. And so
mm.
that's where we go. And no one ever helps us unwind or rethink that narrative. So we just compound it over the years.
Tapping into something deep, man. It's that's it. You want to walk through the process that you would take somebody through to, first of all, identify the problems. I mean, for this guy, it was obvious. He it was too disagreeable. He wasn't speaking. He was speaking too much as opposed to listening and taking other people's viewpoints, which are valid and probably would have helped his company grow further if he would have taken them into account. Walk me through, if somebody doesn't have that problem immediately identified, because a lot of the time somebody will have the symptoms of the problem,
Mhm.
and so,
Well, which was all his word. They were just symptoms, right?
right, exactly. Yeah, okay, so
So another example. Um, You mean usually it's the result of my work as a consultant or executive coach, and I've collected data, right? So I've got a diagnosis that says here's the experience of those around you and of your organization. So I have a sense for what parts of a system are reinforcing it, what are the behaviors that people are saying they wish were different from you, and sometimes it really is. I can give you new techniques, I can give you new skills, I can create new mechanisms for you to operate differently, and those can be sufficient. But if what I call coaching resistant behaviors, in other words, if these things are intractably not going to change, or you're just clearly resistant to the data, much less the truth that you can change, then I know I have a much deeper dig to go after. So uh, Derek was a client. He was a brilliant creative director at a big agency, and he was, I mean, brilliant, um, and was on track to be, go far in this big firm, and so was given an executive coach as a way to get better. And the couple of days I spent in the office, I was doing all the interviews. It was bustling, it was lively, it was high energy. People at whiteboards collaborate. It was really kind of fun. And about maybe 3 weeks later, I was going back to sort of review the results. I sent the report in advance, and I was going back to debrief with Derek. And I walked in, and I thought maybe I was in the wrong place, or it was the wrong day. Like it was looked like there was nobody there. It was like eerie silent. And as I walked around, I could see people in their cubicles, down quiet. Nobody was talking. There was not a sound. It was like Armageddon. And I'm like, what in the world? And so I made my way up to Derek's admin's desk, and I said, "Is everything okay?" He looked up, goes, "Derek's in one of his moods." I'm like,
Mm.
what does that mean? He said, he just asked me to go to the storage room to find empty boxes. I said, "Why does he want empty boxes?" He said, "Because he assumes that after he finishes with you, he's getting fired." I'm like, "What? Why? Did I miss that?" He goes, "No, because of your feedback." I'm like, "What?" This was like, I was like, "Am I in another world here?" And so I went into Derek's office, and I'm like, "Is everything okay?" He said, "Well, I know where this is going to go. Let's just get it over with." I'm like, "Get what over with?"
Mm.
He goes, "Well, I read the report. I know what's going to happen." I'm like, "What's going to happen?" He said, I'm sure we're going to walk up to my boss's office and he's let me go." I'm like, "Did you read the?" And then I started to think, "Oh my God, I sent the wrong report. Did I send this?" Because if you read his report, he was loved. He had things he needed to work on. I mean, every data is going to say, here's where you need to grow. One of his was that he was a catastrophizer. Like, people would say things like, "Derek can go to the dark side faster than anybody I know. He can turn a stub toe into an amputation." Like, people would say all kinds of things about his inability to see objectively when there was a problem.
Clearly, yeah.
Well, so I understood what catastrophizing is, but now I'm looking at this going, oh, this is like a whole other level. I'm like, "Derek, that is not what's about to happen here. Your bosses love you. They think the world of you. I'm the most expensive coach they could find, and they're paying me as an investment in your future. Nothing of the sort is about to happen to your career because of this data, other than fast tracking you to a bigger job." And he looked at me like he was like incredulous. Like, first I was like, "I don't believe you. You're just trying to soften the blow." And I'm like, "What?" So over the coming months of my work with Derek, I came to learn that he grew up in a home with incredibly perfectionistic parents, where expectations of his athletic performance, his academic performance, his household chore performance could never stray from perfect. And he said, he what he quickly discovered was, I always assumed I knew my parents loved me, and assumed that they were pushing me because they wanted the best for me, and that was their way of showing me love. And I said, do you want to rethink a little bit of that? I'm sure in their own way they did love you, but what do you make of the fact that they couldn't accept you when you weren't perfect. He said, I never understood that my need for perfection, my need for others to be perfect, was my need for validation and love. I said,
Mm.
it's a deep one. One of the stories he told me was in his senior year of high school. It was midterm season, and of course, he was applying to all the Ivy League schools that they assumed he would get into. And it was midterms in December, and the last game of the regular football season in the same week, and he dropped the pass in the end zone that would have won the game and sent his team to the playoffs. And in that same week, got I think it was a C minus or B plus or something on a midterm. 2 weeks later at Christmas, he got no gifts. It was sort of their way of disciplining him for falling short. He thought it was just normal. He said, well, I don't deserve any gifts. And I said, Derek, you have so much to learn about your worthiness and what you believe is or isn't worthy about to yourself and to the people you lead,
Just
because
like
they're
he
out there to
deserved to
provide.
be, well, like he deserved in his mind to be fired based on some minor, some
Well,
minor
so I said,
perceived
his
negative
narrative
feedback,
is, I will
right?
fall short and
Same
be
thing.
shunned,
Yeah.
right? And so when there's a narrative that says, I'll fall short and be shunned, he just assumed that now, instead of his parents, was going to be his boss.
Yeah. And you can see that
And it was,
exact same
it
pattern
was,
replaying. It is exactly what we're talking about, right? It's the same exact thing replaying in adulthood now. And so
and
it's a
so his,
perfect demonstration of it too.
which
Yeah.
had been reenacted probably hundreds of times.
You know, at least, yeah. Macro,
And
micro, that's a big one, but then there are all kinds of little ones, they're the same
otherwise,
thing playing up, playing up, playing up. It's
anytime someone on his team fell short, anytime there was a missed deadline,
yeah.
anytime he didn't
Mm.
like, it was this trigger.
And then he would perceive anybody else's, like let's say his assistant's mistake as his mistake because of that projection that he's projecting onto them.
Sometimes, and sometimes he was just cruel to them. He treated them like the way his parents treated him.
Because he expected perfection out of them the same way that his parents expected
Yep.
perfection out of him, is the reality
Yep.
that he lived in.
And it was sad. He was a good guy. He was a really good guy. He has a longer train of work to do, to let
Don't
go
we
of all
all,
that,
man? Don't we
all that.
all?
And he's holding a lot of rage in his body and a lot of hurt and a lot of rejection. So he has a lot to let go of, but at least he's now aware that the hypervigilant data he collects isn't reliable. And so when he's drawing those hard, fast conclusions about what's going, the other shoe's going to fall, to immediately zoom back and say, what are the other options here? What are the other ways to interpret? And I force him to give me 10 interpretations besides the one you're dwelling on. What are the other ways to see this and other ways it could go?
Hmm.
And I make him write out every possible universe of scenarios. Because what about the upsides? Like, what if it was to go really, really well?
Yeah.
And which, of course, no file for that. And so he's training himself to create new neural pathways away from the, catastrophe that he expects to the other scenarios that he can also create and have agency in guiding.
So walk me through the process that somebody can take if they're listening or watching, us included, when we notice that there are negative patterns of action playing out in our lives. So you start off with this is the way you did it when you were looking at other people in his organization, for example, is getting feedback of what the perceived negatives are in the situation, of what could be optimized, right? So what's a question that we can ask our friends or family to extract what the problem is that we might not be aware of?
I think if you have people who would be honest with you, ask them, what do I do that annoys you?
Okay.
Where do you see me in my life not living up to
Hmm.
my values?
Interesting. Right.
How can I be a better friend to you? How can I be a better spouse to you? How can I be a better dad or mom to you?
Mm.
When do I shine? What are the things that I do that impress you or make you see me living at my best? Um, just get people to tell you stories. When do I disappoint you?
Okay. Okay. So that'll give you the objective perspective of what you're experiencing without maybe realizing it. So you can extract that feedback, and then what's the next step? Because then we have to start to examine the root cause of the actions that
Well,
are optimized.
I certainly would ask. I think you should ask yourself, when are you most dissatisfied? When do you act in ways you wish you regret or you wish were different? Do you freeze up in big moments of opportunity? Do you lose your temper at the strangest moments with random people? Are you impatient with yourself? Do you are you turning to when you're stressed? Are you turning to activities that are unhealthy that that if people knew about, you'd be shamed and embarrassed? Um, do you, do you know why you turn to those things? So, I mean, find the places that you're dissatisfied. They may not be the very same things that other people in a 360 would tell you about because they may not see them all, but they're going to give you hints about the stressors that you're hiding or turning to. At least you have two then two looks at it. But and don't be afraid to ask for help. Like you don't have to do this by yourself. But certainly, if there are repetitive patterns, assume that they're just reenactments and ask yourself, what is it you're reenacting?
Mm.
What is it?
Yeah.
What is, in other words, when that person walks onto the stage of your story and it's it's the dry cleaner or it's your teacher, lift up the mask they're wearing as a character. Who are they really in the story? Is it your is,
Wow.
is
That's
it your third grade?
powerful, man.
Is it
Yeah.
the third grade gym teacher? Is it your mom? Is
Yeah.
it Uncle Bill?
Mm.
Is it the teenage neighbor?
Wow.
Um, so who have you cast in the story as the reenactors in the scenario you keep repeating and keep bringing yourself back to the scene of the crime? And understanding the
Mm.
physiological reasons we do that. I mean, it's not random. When your body experiences an unpleasant or difficult situation, your nervous system is activated, right? Chemicals like cortisol and adrenaline and other stress induced chemicals are flowing through your nervous system, and that stress loop opens. For the most part, our bodies will then do a scan and go, okay, safe, we're good. I can regulate now. I can calm down, and all those chemicals can leave my nervous system, and that stress loop can close. But sometimes it doesn't happen. The stress loop stays open, our nervous system stays activated, and we just find ways to cope. But it's like a record player that skips on the record player, right? You have to hit it to get it to go. Our nervous system is skipping, and it wants to close the loop. So it will keep
Mm.
bringing you to situations to reenact that same thing so it can close that loop. Of course, that won't work because you're not even aware you're doing it. And so you have to understand that your body is trained to go reenact that experiences so it can resolve the unresolved or what I call undigested life experience
Mm.
and go resolve it. And you're going to keep looking for why do women who've been abused keep going to abused
Yeah.
relationships?
Right, they're trying to
They're,
just close that. They're trying to close that loop, right?
right,
It's the same thing. If a young girl was abused by her dad, and then it's curious how she'll attach to men in the future that are similar to her father, especially in the way that loop was never closed.
right,
And they'll never consciously look at it a lot of the time because what they're really doing is they're trying to gain closure. First of all, they look for something familiar, and they're trying to gain closure off of reenacting, which is an interesting way of putting it, reenacting what they had experienced then to get a new result in the future so
right.
that that loop can be closed.
Even
But
though the
not
narrative is, I deserve this.
interesting, right? Mm. There's so much work that needs to be done, man, with so many of us. You know what I mean? Like me included, man.
We all have stories we're carrying around that need to
Yeah,
be resolved.
yeah. And then I think we tapped
And to
into
your
some.
point earlier, when we all bring those stories into the workplace, now we have colliding narratives.
Yeah, right. And then we wonder why everything's not copacetic like a well-oiled machine sometimes,
There's no reason
man.
to wonder why workplaces are dysfunctional. It's all that stuff bouncing off each other that we bring every day.
Yeah, bouncing off each other like a pinball machine that we just can't. There's no end to pinball. It's an never-ending process. Unless the ball goes down the middle, which is an interesting analogy there to find balance, go down the middle as opposed to being unbalanced in some way or another because you haven't examined and done the work to find that equilibrium again.
Yep.
So interesting analogy that came up there. So I love it, man. Fascinating conversation we had, dude. Seriously, it's
Yep.
beautiful the way that we can first of all examine the issues that are taking place in our lives, and then going back to finding the root causes, something that happened, who knows at what point in your life, and then you've been reenacting this to try to find a new ending to it. And because you're
Mhm.
not conscious of what you're actually doing, it's a lot of the time going to have the exact same thing playing out over and over again until you realize what's actually happening and make those course corrections to close the loop and move on with the new belief structure and identity. So it's
Yeah.
beautiful, man. Anything else you want to add before we kick this off?
No, great to be with you. Thanks for having me on your show. If folks want to find more about me, they can go to Navalent, NAVALENT.com. If you want to learn more about the book and the research, we have actually the real fun part about the book was we did video interviews of all the heroes, many of the heroes in the book, and we created a TV series called Moments of Truth. It's like a 20 Dateline 2020 news magazine show. And if you go to BeHonest.net, you can watch all 15 episodes of Moments of Truth. And there's other videos there and articles, so you can find out more about the honesty research there. And connect with me on LinkedIn and stay in touch.
I love it, man. ToBeHonest.net. I'm gonna check that out because that's something I'm fascinated about. So I love it. .net, right? ToBeHonest.net.
Yep,
Okay, because I
we're at
went .com
navalent.com.
didn't work. Okay, perfect. Gotcha. Ron, dude, thank you so much, brother. I'm gonna take a look at those 15 episodes, and we will be in touch. I appreciate you.
All right, man, you take good care.
You too, brother. Talk soon. Bye.
All right, I hope you enjoyed that podcast episode. And if you want to get a free copy of my book, go to kylesbook.com and you can get a copy there. I'll talk with you soon.